Hello and welcome to a Total Education Centre, Total Education media production of The Shipping News by Amy Prue. This is the second lecture in the characters series, and tonight we'll be focusing on some of the major characters. The first lecture of course covered Coil, and we only got through one character in that lecture, and I'm hoping to do a little bit more tonight for you. But let's focus first of all on Aunt Agnes. Aunt Agnes, I feel, is a catalyst for many of Coil's actions, and she certainly has had an interesting life, starting with her sexual abuse by her brother, Coil's father. And it's very interesting as you read later on in the text, and I'm sure you've read it by now, that she actually throws her brother's ashes down the toilet and squats on them, and she thinks that's a remarkably fitting end for him. That's the sort of dark issue that Prue employs throughout the novel, and that's one excellent example that you could use. Aunt Agnes, her interactions with the world are generally successful. She's moved away from Newfoundland, she's got a partner, she started a business, a successful business, and then has moved back to Newfoundland when things didn't work out. On Newfoundland she manages to adapt and change, she starts a business there, finds it's not working, and moves away again. Her path is very focused and very straightforward, and she's able to navigate the world very clearly. She loses a lover to cancer, then she loses Warren, the toothless female dog, and sort of adapts and changes to those things, and sort of drags Coil along with her in many ways. Her ability to adapt and change to the global is probably the main aspect of a feature that we want to look at in this examination, but we need to look clearly at how does she show this. Well, one way is that she moves physically from one place to another, and she's not scared to move physically from one place to another. Her ability to change and adapt in a physical environment sense is very clear. She's able to adapt to business. She leaves one area of a business, moves to Newfoundland, starts it up again, employs people, moves it on again, as I said, very clear. Part of her adaptability and skills is she is able to develop new skills, such as she learns to work the leather and becomes successful in making leather seating for yachts and leather furnishing covers for yachts. And these skills are developed because she's a lifelong learner. Everywhere she goes she manages to learn and make use of that. And I think that's an important fact when we're talking about navigating the global. She certainly understands how the world works. She's an employer, she has a business, she interacts with the world. She understands how things work, and one excellent example of that would be the insurance for the house, and the way that she's able to understand that if things go wrong she can adapt and move in many ways. And I think that's an important feature for her. Aunt Agnes is very pragmatic, and I think that's the word that we use to describe her. Her pragmatism is helpful to Coil, who's sort of lost in the world in many ways, and she's a motivator for him, and she's a practical person, and she makes him do things and makes him take those steps that eventually leads to his somewhat, for Coil anyway, a successful life. Bunny and Sunshine. Let's talk about Bunny and Sunshine for a moment. Bunny is the elder, she has dreams, visions, and is quite problematic, whereas Sunshine is certainly more compliant and adaptable as a child. Coil's greatest fear is to lose them, and they are his greatest love. And I think that's one thing that the reader of my age, anyway, in particular, who's had children, enjoys. And it's a very important sensation for him, and those children bind him. And we'll talk about family later when we discuss theme. The children help him adapt to island life, the two children, although in his case family is seen as a positive sense once Petal Bear's gone, and as he joins together with Wavy. I'd like to talk momentarily about Bunny's strangeness because it's central to the book, and the fact of the white dog and all those sorts of issues that we'll discuss later in theme. But when we talk about Bunny, and I want to go just to page 141, and Coil's strange in himself, but he notices how strange his daughter is, and I'll read from that. This is from the chapter called The Upholstery Shop, and it's on page 141 of my text. I want to ask you something, Aunt, about Bunny. Steeled for this conversation. Petal had said 100 times that Bunny was a weird kid. He had denied it, but she was, in fact, different. something was out of kilter. She was like a kettle of water, simmering and simmering, or in a noisy boil before the pot goes dry and cracks, or sometimes cold with a skim of mineral flowers on the surface. He asks, "Do you think she's normal, Aunt?" And, she has bad dreams and a temper, and she sees things, and in particular, one can understand why she might be a little bit odd, although she does have a very strong sense of justice, and we see that when she defends Wavy's boy at the school from the teacher who won't let him go to the toilet, and that's on page 315 if you want to look up that episode. Both children should have been traumatised, I think, by their early life. They were cared for, in inverted commas, by Mrs. Messer in the trailer, and sort of don't get out of the trailer at all. Their mother ignores them completely, has no maternal affection for them, in fact says specifically that she doesn't care about them at all. And it's Coyle who seems to shelter them and care for them, protect them from the outside world as much as he can, because when he doesn't interface with the outside world, it's nearly impossible for them to. So they're brought up in a sort of sheltered way, but quite strange. We also need to remember that their mother sells them to a pedophile, and they're just rescued in time. They don't mind the change to Newfoundland. They lived in a trailer back in the city. They had nothing, they had no experience. At least moving to Newfoundland opens up new horizons of them. And we see their adaptation and change as we move through the text. And I think children, and we need to remember this when navigating the global, seem to be far more adaptable than adults in many ways, because they're not conforming, they're not set with their ideas. They certainly are open to new things. They can make new friends much quicker. And so I think Bunny and Sunshine seem to settle in. They certainly like Dennis Boggart's children. They're happy in that family environment. They like Beatty. And we also see at the end, with the acceptance of the white dog, that things have completely turned around for them. And so they're one thing. And I think you should remember out of all that really that it's about children are adaptable to that idea of the global, and you can work through that. Petal Bear. We probably should talk about Petal Bear momentarily. She's Coyle's first love, leads to marriage and the children. She's certainly an impulsive character. She's an adulteress, and she does that with him, in front of him, and she hates Coyle significantly at the end and despises him, as we looked at. And if you go back to the first lecture and made notes on that, you'll see that Coyle especially is hated by Petal Bear. She resents her own children. As we said, she sells them. And Coyle sort of has to recover from her to recover his own life. And he does that very late in the novel, and we talk about that specifically later on when we talk about family and love. But we need to remember that it's very traumatic for him that he's rejected in this way, especially because he's never had a proper relationship before. And it's very difficult for him to get over that. She dies in a car accident running away with a new lover after selling the children with a pocket full of cash. And Cole's opinion of her is very different to everybody else's. For example, Aunt Agnes sees her as a bitch in high heels, and everybody else knows that she's a bit of an adulteress, and she has no moral fibre whatsoever, and certainly no ethics for leaving her children. But Cole, in his blindness and his inanity, sees her very differently. He says about her, and I'll read this. He says of Petal Bear, "Some people probably thought she was bad, but I think she was starved for love. I think she just couldn't get enough love. That's why she was the way she was. Deep down, she didn't have a good opinion of herself. Those things she did, they reassured her for a little while. I wasn't enough for her." And really that quote says more about Coyle than it does about Petal Bear, because he still blames himself. He always blames himself, and he has that fear of the world, and everything seems to be his fault. And he's been brought up that way, and that's very hard. And we all understand when we read the text that Petal Bear really probably is a bitch in high heels, as the aunt points out, and that we have no empathy with her at all, and we certainly don't like her as a character, and she's hard on Coyle, and he accepts that, and so we have that contradiction in our empathy when we read it. And I think Prue's developing that, so later on that we do have more empathy with Coyle when he meets Wavy, and that relationship, that long, slow burning relationship begins. And so that leads us into talking about Wavy. And she too has suffered and has some very difficult times. Once married to Harold, whose infidelity is legendary on the island, and she's certainly damaged by this, and we see that her son Harry has Down syndrome, and you can get more information on the Down syndrome, and I've put the website address in the notes so that you understand his characterisation very clearly. She's fully integrated into Newfoundland life, and she sort of lives there and owns there, has been brought up there, but she understands the outside world in a limited way, and she's never really extended herself as a person, and probably the first time she really does that goes away with Coyle when they visit the uncle and move off the island for a couple of days. She's a strong character in many ways, and we see that with the way she fights for her son. We see the way that she stands up to people, the way she conducts herself. Her ability to walk is legendary. I'm not sure quite why that is, and we see she's the one who buys the white dog in the end as part of that healing process. And she too, much like Coyle, has to get over that relationship, and there's that scene where they talk about that. We see her walking a lot, of course, as I mentioned, especially in the rain. And we see in chapter 37, Slingstones, that they both get through that past. They talk about their past relationships and come to realise that those past relationships aren't what they've imagined them to be. The reality of those past relationships was negative and wrong and not the positive thing. In the end, of course, they go to St. John's, they consummate their relationship, and they're but that's still hanging there. It's only after that consummation that they really get over those two past relationships. She marries Coyle. They seem quite suited to each other. Doesn't seem to any great depth of love or passion, or it's not a romance as such in a romance novel. There seems to be some sort of more acceptance. I've written here in my notes, it's not a great happiness, but they're both contented in very much like Coyle, and it's an easy relationship, and it's sort of protected from the world in many ways, and there is no pain, as we pointed out previously when we talked about Coyle. That absence of pain is enough for him to exist in the world. I'd like to talk also tonight quickly about Jack Buggett. Jack's a very important character in that not only does he employ Coyle, but he's a realist about the changing world, perhaps even slightly cynical, and he uses this to his advantage to own the Gammy Bird. He's seen Canada take over Newfoundland, if you like, or Newfoundland join with Canada or whatever, and all the great promises that were made, and how there'd be jobs and wonderful things, and none of it ever eventuated really. But he's managed to work his way through that and move forward and get the Gammy Bird and take that. He's a traditionalist in many ways. His family life's very strong. His grandfather, and all his family have been on the island for many a time. The local attribute he has is certainly a second sight, and that second sight's extremely important. His death at the end is a brilliant plot twist by Prue, and a lovely piece of writing when he wakes up at his own funeral. His importance in his story is his views on globalisation and its effect on the island and the people, and we see this very clearly when he talks about on pages 307 and 308, and certainly when he goes sealing on 321, and the herring traps, and other times throughout the text when he talks to Coyle early in the novel, when he talks about how he moves forward. Well, we're nearly through the characters. We got through a few more than we did last time, certainly, and probably we'll need to do another one of these to get through the rest of the characters, and I'll leave that for a little while you absorb this information. I hope you've enjoyed this Total Education media production. Don't forget to visit our website. It's important that you get all the resources you need, and certainly the notes that add to this lecture are on that website for you available to purchase, plus some audio lectures that you can download and listen to on your iPod or in your car. Don't forget to press the like button below me there on the YouTube page, and good night.